Hello again. I'm Paul Beckwith, and this is Shackleton, and he's a bit restless. He's not very photogenic tonight, so I just wanted to, get him in the video so that maybe can help this thing go viral. So, I'm continuing my discussion on existential climate-related security risks. An Australian think tank, Breakthrough Institute, published a report authored by David Spratt, who has done a great blog for many years called Climate Code Red, and by Ian Dunlop, who was a fossil fuel industry executive in coal, etc., but then realized, sort of has come around and realized the threats that we face from abrupt climate change. So let me get right back into where I left off in the previous video. So this is the report I'm going to be talking about, and this was an article on, a live science article on the report about how serious the threats are that we face, and how do we prevent this catastrophic vision of the future. Only if the world accepts climate change for the emergency it is. And I've been saying this for many, many years. Gets to work immediately. According to, these authors, and I disagree, we don't have a decade left to mount this global movement. We have to, we don't know if things are too late, but we have no choice but to act, with a huge global movement akin to World War II emergency mobilization. So, if you followed my videos and others, you know that I've been saying this for, I sound like a broken record. I've been saying this for years and years and years, that we have to declare a global climate emergency. We have to have a Manhattan-sized project or, emergency mobilization. And more people are starting to come around and say this. So one thing about this policy paper is that one of the Australian Admiral, Chris Berry, he was the Australian Defence Chief, a senior Royal Navy commander. He testified to the Australian Senate about these devastating possibilities of climate change poses to national security. Basically, after nuclear war, human-induced global warming is the greatest threat to human life on the planet, he wrote as an intro to the new paper. Human life on Earth may be on the way to extinction in the most horrible way. So let's have a look. But first of all, I want to talk about, there is a paper here, an article that's referenced here, the top 9 ways the world could end. So let's have a look at that. It's from 2013, and climate change is right up there, the mother of all apocalyptic fears. It's the biggest threat facing the planet, many scientists say. It talks about the cascade of changes that can basically make Earth unable to support life, at least human life. Asteroid is right up there, of course. We're trying to detect as many as possible, but there's still lots we don't know about. A pandemic is, it's considered here, but I don't think I think the risk of a pandemic is much lower. We know that the risk from global warming, climate change, is huge and ongoing and is only getting worse and worse. And on the present route that we're following is it's almost a certainty. These other things are, much lower probabilities, but if an asteroid hit, it would be, and it would obviously be catastrophic, and it would be a very quick event compared, as fast as abrupt climate change is, you can't have something as quick, here today, gone tomorrow sort of thing with an asteroid. The pandemic threat, I think, it talks about SARS, bird flu and things. We're highly interconnected global economy. People fly across the world, in a matter of hours, and stuff would spread. But if we had a pandemic and it was spreading, we'd quarantine completely, and we'd nip the thing in the bud, I think. So I don't think this is really a global threat so much as these other things, and it's not just a pandemic or a bacterial threat, but fungal threats are scarier. Apparently they're rarer, but we don't have ways of treating them. We don't have any antibiotics, for example, so that could be a possibility. And then engineered diseases. So, researchers engineered a mutant version of the bird flu H5N1, for example. So we could engineer something, it can escape from the lab or be used as a biological weapon and, have no immunity to it. Nuclear war is, of course, right up there. Robot ascension. So, AI going rogue, for example. Many computer scientists think the singularity, the point at which AI, artificial intelligence, overtakes human intelligence is near. Okay, and of course overpopulation is behind everything, and the snowball effect is multiple effects, like with climate change accelerating, not only do people get dumber, but it's warmer, there can be easier spread of pathogens, ecosystem collapses make it harder to produce food, no bees pollinating crops, etc. So all of these things cascade to bring down civilization. So those are some of the things that are considered. Now, going to the report here, so it's not that long, it's only about 12 pages, so let's go into some of the details here. So this is David Spratt, Research Director of Breakthrough National Center for Climate Restoration. So he's been doing the Climate Code Red blogs for many, many years. There was a report, where he made the case for emergency action. Ian Dunlop is in the Club of Rome. He was an international oil, gas, and coal industry executive. Realized what's going on, and now he's a co-author of this paper. Now, this admiral, Chris Berry, who testified to the Australian Senate about the implications of climate change to Australia's national security. So basically, the inquiry found that climate change is a current and existential national security risk, one that threatens the premature extinction of Earth-originating intelligent life or the permanent and drastic destruction of its potential for desirable future development. So, it could just, in other words, we could talk about extinction of Earth-originating intelligent life, or we can talk about being so crippled by climate change that we lose technologies, that we go back to living, in caves and things like that. In other words, we get hammered so hard that very few of us survive, and we lose all of our technologies and our ability to do any thing to address climate change. So, after nuclear war, human-induced global warming is the greatest threat to human life on the planet. Today, it's 7.7 billion now. We're already the most predatory species that ever existed. Yet we may reach 10, even 11 billion people, with dire implications absent a fundamental change in human behavior. So, the unvarnished truth is here in this report, about how the very real possibility that human life on Earth may be on the way to extinction in the most horrible way. So here's some things, around the world. He mentions in Australia, but we've had this around the world. One, young women are speaking about their decisions to not have children. If they think that the world there's no future for, kids, then why have the kids in the first place? Many climate scientists are admitting to depression as they consider the inevitable nature of a doomsday future, and they turn towards thinking more about family and relocation to safer places rather than working on more research. I think this is becoming more of a problem in the U.S. because, the Trump situation has just said, well, people throw up their hands and say, well, what's the point of doing more and more research on climate change? Where am I going to live in the future? What am I going to do to keep my family safe, sort of thing. And then there's more civil disobedience going on. There's Extinction Rebellion. There's a Sunrise Movement. Governments in Australia are still opening up coal deposits and deep water oil and, You know, these are suicidal increases in carbon emissions. You know, so school children around the world are angered over their parents' irresponsibility to act on climate change. You know, it's not a technological or a scientific problem. It's a question of humanity's socio-political values. We need a social tipping point. You know, if you've seen my videos from many, many years ago, I say we need a tipping point in human understanding on how serious climate change is. We need to declare a climate emergency. We need to deploy solar radiation management and carbon dioxide removal, and you know, try to reverse the runaway situation that will bring us all down. So, you know, the point is, and I do agree with this, a doomsday future is not inevitable, but without drastic action, our prospects are poor. You know, we need to act collectively. We need strong, determined leadership, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, in order to do these things, we have to have a reason. The world needs to understand that without doing these things, we're basically kaput. So the intelligence and security services have a vital role to play. This is very true. You know, I don't understand why, you know, the military in the U.S. doesn't step in and say, look, you know, to Trump, you know, these views are untenable. You know, you know, and start giving, you know, pushing back and saying we're losing our bases or flooding. You know, climate change is the biggest threat we're all facing. You know, you're a threat to our future by continuing these views of climate denial and so on. Okay, so basically, you know, one of the things is that the climate science projections are based on computer models. People need to understand that the present policies are conservative and reticent, and they're just based on climate models that have been shown time and time again to not accurately predict the rate of change of which things are happening, and also to, you know, everything's happening faster than expected. You know, climate change is a near and midterm existential threat. We need to have better ways of looking at the risks, and look at the high end and difficult to quantify fat tail possibilities. So in other words, you know, the risk is always the probability of occurrence of something happening times the consequences. So even if the probability is very low and the consequences are like taking down civilization, then the risk is the product of the two, and it's going to be very large, but it's not easy to quantify it because you're multiplying a very large number by a very small number, and you know, how do you really have a good handle on what the result is? But so what they did is they created a 2050 scenario based in which accelerating climate change impacts pose large negative consequences to humanity. Okay, so they look at the scenario, and then based on that scenario, you can try to quantify things. So, you know, the military has been saying that climate change is a threat multiplier, an accelerant to instability, right? The impacts on food and water systems, declining crop yields and rising food prices, driven by drought, wildfire, and harvest failures, have already become catalysts for social breakdown and conflict across the Middle East. Think the Arab Spring, the Maghreb, and the Sahel, you know, desert areas that are precarious to begin with, and that's contributed to the European migration crisis. So we're already seeing, you know, huge impacts, and there has been lots of scientific reticence. Climate scientists erring on the side of least drama, you know, trying to keep their jobs, etc. You know, following the status quo, meeting all kinds of roadblocks about speaking out about their knowledge about how bad climate change is. You know, even in 2007, security analysts said that scientific predictions had consistently underestimated the severity of what's transpired, especially with the IPCC. Okay, other forms of knowledge are downplayed, like paleoclimatology, expert advice, semi-empirical models, right? And the IPCC only talks about the severe nonlinear system change possibilities in a descriptive, non-quantified form, sort of as an afterthought, saying, you know, here's what we think is going to happen, but, you know, here's what could happen, and what could happen is always, you know, is basically happening. I mean, their sea level rise projections are laughably small. You know, the Department of Defense says 2-meter rise by 2100, or 2.5 meters. You know, they should recalculate. I'd still say 7 meters by 2070. You can Google that. The title, Can Sea Level Rise 7 Meters by 2070? So I'll continue in a third video. Thanks.